This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies.
Hi, Georgie. Aren't you going to say hello?
Hi, I've been a horror junkie since the age of 6, which sounds very wrong, and it is, but oh well. Over the years, I've learned that, regardless of genre, there's one particular cinematic approach that gets in my head more than anything else. Implied uncanny horror. Right. What the f*** is that? You just made that up. Yes, I did. But hear me out, because this style could have been unknowingly influencing your horror movie taste for years. It's a complicated technique to describe, however, so let's start with a short exercise. When I say horror film, what image or an idea comes to your mind first? I'll give you a second to think. Okay, I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of you either pictured a killer from the classic slashers like Tenebrae, Halloween, or Friday the 13th, or a ghost from Asian supernatural works like Ring or Cairo. And yes, supernatural could include possession horror like The Exorcist, as well as those that mix psychological elements like The Shining. A big portion of the rest of you likely fall into the splatter category with the likes of Cannibal Holocaust, Dead Alive, or Reanimator.
What were you researching? Death.
And for the remaining few, I would start with sci-fi fused works like Event Horizon or Phantasm, moving on to creature films like Jaws, body horror like The Fly, and why the hell not both with The Thing. If your name is still not cold, perhaps you're an Alfred Hitchcock type of person, which is fair. I'll give you that as a subgenre. But don't you dare say elevated horror, unless you're literally afraid of elevators. And if you said horror comedy, you're lying. The point here is that talking about horror as a genre often requires specification because there are countless subgenres, each conveying different types of horror, with any given film typically consisting of multiple subgenres. Okay, so what exactly do I mean when I say implied uncanny horror? That's a jargon I won't be using for the rest of this video, I promise, because I was actually referring to two separate ideas: implied violence and uncanny valley. Yeah, I cheated. Both of these terms are rather jaded nowadays, but in reality they are a lot more sophisticated than many people think. First, there is the concept of uncanny valley, which could be as simple as using a mask or special effects makeup to intensify the visual terror, mixing darkness and out-of-place expressions to elicit dread, bluntly presenting an unnaturally exaggerated countenance to shake the audience, or even putting someone in a full costume to do whatever this does. As long as it is presented in the right context and timing with the appropriate shot execution, the deployment of Uncanny Valley will refine the comprehensive intention. And if you want this effect to assume greater prominence in the scene, you could try using motion. Kiyoshi Kurosawa is a master of this technique, often letting the mise-en-scène work in tandem with the movement by visually encapsulating the inhuman figure and expanding the disquiet from a single point to the entire setting. The resulting shot is one that expands beyond merely illuminating the source of terror, instead completely estranging the human character. If Uncanny Valley is all about heightening anxiety by introducing new elements of subtle terror, Implied Violence is about maximizing the psychological strain a scene can impose through the power of graphic imagination. At least for the topic at hand, remember that. Otherwise, it's an infinitely adaptable tool. Now, this may sound elementary in comparison, but the process of evoking blatant mental disturbance is just as complex, if not more. First off, there are multiple ways of animating implied violence. The verbal exposition type has a character describe the violence that is about to take place with or without the visual aftermath. Pulp Fiction would be a good example of one without,
with a pair of pliers and a blowtorch. I ain't through with you by damn sight. I'ma get medieval on your ass.
And Pan's Labyrinth would be the one with.
Y cuando lleguemos a esta, te voy a creer todo lo que me digas.
A common variant of this method uses the verbal description to replace the violence that has already occurred, as beautifully demonstrated in David Fincher's Seven.
He made me do it. He put that thing on me.
There are also scenes that are not implied per se, featuring minimal violence, but still come across as absolutely horrific through context. The ending of The Mist would be a solid example, except that the violence occurs before the actual moment of impact. So for a more accurate representation, I'll choose George Slyzer's 1988 film, The Vanishing. If you know, you know. But by far the most popular form of implied violence is the sound-oriented off-screen violence, with or without visible aftermath. Classic examples include the curb stomp from American History X, the ear scene from Reservoir Dogs, and the tongue scene from Oldboy. Some of the more recent examples include the door scene from Green Room, the baseball kid from Dr. Sleep, and the dramatic reenactment from The Card Counter. If you've seen any of the films I've listed, you'll understand on a primitive level why they are so effective. Something terrible is happening, you don't get to see it, so your mind fills in the blank, making the situation more personal and therefore more visceral. But that's only scratching the surface, because simply turning away from the action does not guarantee a better result. If that was the case, there wouldn't be any successful splatter films. Likewise, impeccable and creative sound design is a given. After all, it's expected in any film scene, let alone one all about suggestion. What truly matters is the cadence, the underlying rhythm and flow of the film, narratively, thematically, and otherwise. Let's take the door scene from Green Room to see what other factors are at play. First is the narrative flow. For a good 45 minutes, the film stays relatively uninvolved with explicit violence, instead gradually conditioning the audience to a sense of realism and even mundanity. This not only makes the story more relatable and plausible, but also lulls the audience into a false sense of security, preventing them from recognizing the imminent threat literally waiting just outside the door. This sets up the punchline nicely, but for the effect to truly land, this turning point must carry enough weight to define the tone for the rest of the film. Which brings us to the second aspect, the audiovisual language of the scene itself, which in this case includes parallel images, accented sound effects, and unexpected revelations that shape how the audience perceives the event. I have a whole video dedicated to Green Room, so refer to that if you want to hear more, but simply put, everything before and in the course of the scene is designed to feel as personal and shocking as possible, an optimal space for your imagination to run wild, hence the use of implied violence. And this goes for the rest of the examples as well. Sometimes it will allow the scene to remove unnecessary visual distractions and maintain its emotional undercurrent. At other times, it will highlight the horror of an action the audience has been dreading to see, and yet other times, it will do both, as skillfully portrayed in Pascal Plant's Red Rooms. Revolving around a high-profile trial of a serial killer, Red Rooms initially uses graphic verbal description to prime the unfolding for depicted violence, leaving viewers on tenterhooks. However, when the time comes, the foreshadowing is fulfilled off-screen. This not only subverts the expectation, but also worsens the psychological torment, leaving anticipation to conjure the unseen. Now, this breakdown doesn't do justice to the magnitude of the unveiling, so I recommend you experience it for yourself. It's worth a watch. That said, explicit violence has its own place, where, with the right context and timing, it can outshine anything implied. Case in point, splatter films. A more relevant case in point, thematically speaking, Saving Private Ryan. And for something directly comparable, just think about how much more upsetting the climactic sequence in Danny Boyle's 127 Hours becomes by showing the violence paired with the immaculate sound design. And if you're curious to learn more about the specifics of implementing these techniques,
너나 잘하세요.
watch any of Park Chan-wook's works, as he is practically unmatched in his ability to seamlessly navigate between the two styles, with every decision perfectly serving the desired outcome. But I digress. The moral is, as long as it fits the intended tone, well-executed implied violence will always be more vivid than on-screen brutality that is merely displayed colorfully. So, tell me, what gets in your head? Hello everyone, thank you as always for watching. I know I gave plenty of different examples about the two concepts in discussion today, but there are so many more films that showcase these techniques with near flawless execution, and if I had to go in depth with every single one of them, it would probably take more than 10 different videos to get through them all. But regardless, if any of the example titles seem unfamiliar, and you're curious about how they use the techniques to augment the scene or the story as a whole, I highly recommend you check them out. And if you want even more works that may be of your interest in regards to learning about various styles and tricks, I urge you to check out today's sponsor, Mubi. Mubi is an online curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe, ranging from works of iconic directors to emerging auteurs. It's a great way to watch films you already love, but it's also the perfect way to discover new films you've never seen before, especially because every film on Mubi is handpicked. For instance, Coralie Forget's The Substance is a great example of a film that uses explicit violence to augment its themes. And I actually got to rewatch it on Mubi in preparation for this video. I'm currently in Canada, and so your Mubi selections may look different. But Mubi always has carefully picked selections of works that are more than worth watching wherever you may be. Plus, right now, you can try Mubi free for 30 days by using my link at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. That is mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. So check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.